At 9:52 a.m., just as my name was about to be called at MIT's graduation ceremony, my phone buzzed 3 times in the pocket of my graduation gown. A short vibration, then silence. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My father always texted like that, brief, sharp, emotionless. I pulled out my phone. A single line glowed on the screen. "Don't expect help. Handle it yourself. No congratulations. No punctuation." Nothing but a thin layer of frost over the joy that had just begun to spark. Before I could process it, my phone buzzed again, this time a call. The caller ID read Jennifer, CipherLink's CFO. I tilted my body, slightly shielding my face to avoid drawing attention in the row of graduating students. "Emily." Her voice was almost choked with emotion. "The NYSE just set the IPO price. $44. We're valued at over $1 billion. You're officially the CEO of a unicorn." I closed my eyes. Part of me was overwhelmed. Part of me was fighting to stay calm. My throat tightened, not sure if it was from joy or the text still lingering in my phone. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'm at graduation. I'll see you in 30 minutes. "Don't forget this moment," she said softly. "One day, 2 milestones. Not everyone gets that." I hung up, slipped the phone back into my gown, and looked up at the pale blue sky above Killian Court. Up ahead, the president had begun speaking. Beside me, Natalie, my roommate, gently squeezed my hand, a silent question. I nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine." But truthfully, I wasn't sure what I felt. Joy, pride, or an old pain stirred awake just when I thought I'd left it behind. I'm Emily Turner, born and raised in the suburbs west of Houston, Texas. The youngest of 3 siblings, and the only one not called an heir. My father, William Turner, was a conservative businessman renowned in the construction materials industry. To him, everything had to be tangible, pourable, like concrete, measurable with a steel ruler. He believed in success that could be weighed and quantified, and he never saw me as part of that. My mother, Sharon, was a gentle, resigned woman. She taught me how to chop onions without crying, how to fold blankets into perfect rectangles, how to stay silent when others looked down on me. She loved me in her own quiet way, but never dared shield me from my father's harshness. My childhood was spent curled up in the kitchen corner with an old Python programming book, celebrating successful code in silence and earning math awards that no one in the house bothered to hang on the wall. At 15, I won first place in a statewide student app competition. Mom bought cake, my brother patted my shoulder, but my father glanced at it and said, "Apps don't build bridges." I quietly applied to MIT. With help from my guidance counselor and a merit scholarship, I got accepted into computer engineering. The day I received the acceptance letter, my father stared at me and said, "Good. But if your GPA drops below 4.0, don't expect another dime. Intelligence doesn't feed anyone." I left home with 1 suitcase of clothes, an old laptop, and a fragile belief that I could rewrite my future. 4 years later, here I was among thousands of students about to receive their diplomas. Half of me was an honors graduate in engineering from MIT. The other half was the CEO of CipherLink, a fledgling cybersecurity startup I co-founded with 2 classmates, just listed on the stock exchange with a valuation over $1.1 billion. The achievements came at once, but instead of family congratulations, I got 6 familiar words. "Don't expect help. Handle it yourself." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I no longer needed his congratulations to feel worthy. After the ceremony, I stepped into Killian Court. Graduation photos fluttered everywhere. Parents, relatives, friends, everyone was hugging, cheering. Natalie was with her family. I stood alone amid the joyous crowd. A TechCrunch reporter recognized me likely from my face on last month's MIT student magazine cover. Emily Turner. "Right, congrats IPO today, huh? Can I get a photo?" I nodded. The camera flashed. In that moment, my father's voice echoed in my memory. "Your future lies where there's concrete and profit. Don't dream." I looked straight into the lens, no longer angry. I only felt pity. Not for myself, but for him, the man who missed the chance to witness a journey he deemed impossible. The photo made TechCrunch's homepage the next morning with the headline, "23-year-old Texas CEO takes cybersecurity startup public." But what wasn't in the photo or the headline was what I'd never forget. A text at 9:52 a.m., 6 words, a quiet rejection of affection, heavy as my entire childhood. I don't remember when I started hating that house, the red brick home at the end of Willow Street in Houston's west suburbs, but I vividly recall the feeling of walking through its varnished wooden door every afternoon after school. Something silent, stern, and suffocatingly cramped, despite the high ceilings and sunlit backyard. Our family had 3 children, but only 2 were named at the dinner table. Thomas and Jack, my older brothers, one studying finance, the other set to inherit Dad's construction materials company, Turner & Sons. Me, Emily the youngest, the only daughter, was simply that girl. My father, originally from Arkansas, moved to Houston in 1983, with nothing but a dream to pave the state with concrete. He built his company from scratch, starting by driving a cement mixer through relentless summers. To him, everything was measurable: profit volume, labor hours, even a person's worth. Anything unquantifiable was by default useless. My mother, Sharon, was once a middle school music teacher. She had a warm, alto voice I only heard when she softly hummed hymns in the kitchen. After I was born, she quit to raise the family. I never saw her argue with Dad. Once, when I asked why, she whispered, "Sometimes silence is the easiest way to love." My earliest clear memory is from when I was 7. I won 2nd place in a district spelling bee. I came home beaming, holding my certificate and gold-plated pencil. Dad didn't look at me, just sipped his coffee and said, "Spelling doesn't lay a house's foundation." I stood still for a moment, then retreated, tucking the certificate into my desk drawer. That night, Mom quietly placed an extra slice of apple pie on my plate, saying nothing. That was her way of loving, silent, discreet, tinged with a vague fear. At 11, I taught myself to code in Scratch on an old computer. I built a simple puzzle game and showed it to Dad. He glanced at the screen, frowned. "Why not go outside?" "This isn't what girls should do." I didn't answer. I just returned to my study corner, adding a few more lines of code. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from realizing the line he drew between me and the rest of the family. Jack, my second brother, once asked if I was hurt that Dad never mentioned me at family meetings. I gave a half-real, half-forced smile. Truthfully, Jack was the only one who sometimes stood up for me. Once, when I got a low grade in PE, Dad called me lazy. Jack cut in, "You didn't make Thomas play soccer back then. Emily's better at math than you were in middle school." Dad looked at him like he'd betrayed the family bloodline. I was never his pride, and I gradually accepted it, not by striving for his approval, but by stepping away from his standards. When I got into MIT, I didn't tell the family right away. I kept the acceptance letter in my drawer for a week, rereading it each night before bed as if to confirm it wasn't a dream. When I finally told Dad, he looked up from his financial reports and said, "Good, but don't expect anything more from this family. Once you leave, you stand on your own." I didn't cry that day. No one in our house cried over things like that. Mom just placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing lightly. Her eyes held an unspoken apology. She gave me a brown envelope with $500, a few small items, and an old notebook with a worn spine. On the first page, in her handwriting, "You may not be your father's dream, but you'll always be my proud reality." I carried that notebook through 4 years of college. It sat in my desk drawer at CipherLink, next to a chip model I designed in my sophomore year. My childhood wasn't marked by beatings or dramatic tragedies. It was simply a series of days caught between expectations and limitations within the red brick walls that muffled sound but blocked all emotion. I learned to be silent to survive, learned to grow without needing protection. But deep down, I still longed for Dad to call my name just once, without judgment. Just once would have been enough. After starting at MIT, I didn't return to that house often. During Thanksgiving or Christmas, I stayed in the living room or at Jack's place. Each visit felt like being a stranger in what was once my home. Dad didn't change. He talked about cement prices, construction projects, tax policies, never asking what I was doing. When he heard I was starting a company, he smirked. "More virtual tech nonsense. My daughter thinks a computer can build the world." That time I left dinner early, standing alone in the backyard. Under the yellow porch light, I looked at the old maple tree Dad planted when I was born. It was taller than I'd imagined, twice the height of the house, its roots pushing up through the soil as if trying to break free. I stared at it for nearly an hour. Not because I loved the tree, but because it was the only thing in that house that made me believe I'd once been wanted. Maybe every child wants to believe that. I didn't hate Dad. I just no longer found myself in the world he built. And I don't think he ever tried to find me in his. But sometimes in the quiet of a city gone dark, I wondered if I truly succeeded. One day, would he change? Would I be strong enough for him to accept me? Or would I always be the girl who doesn't know how to wield a trowel? I didn't know, but I promised myself I wouldn't let his silence define my worth. I'd go far from that red brick house and build a world where I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. A world where I could stand tall head high and say I did it on my own. And perhaps on the day I took my company, public fate chose a strange way to test if I'd kept that promise. The next message came faster than I expected. I wrote that letter one spring night, when the neighborhood had quieted after the familiar buzz of concrete saws from a construction site 2 blocks away. In my small room at a wooden desk by the window, the desk lamp cast light on dusty glass like a blurred mirror of the past. I wrote each line of my MIT application like a verdict on my own life, a verdict full of guilt and hope. I called it guilt because I told no one, not Mom, not Dad, not my brothers. Only Ms. Rosen, my guidance counselor, knew. She read my personal essay one weekend afternoon, then quietly folded it and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Submit it, Emily," she said softly. "Even if you might fail." I nodded, not because I believed in my chances, but because I was so used to the word failure being repeated in my life, like a default label Dad always pinned on any choice that didn't align with his. To me, MIT was the light at the end of the tunnel. To Dad, it was a vague, dubious, far-off name. He didn't know what MIT was, but he was certain it wasn't the path for a practical girl. I hid the application among stacks of safe in state public school forms names he'd approve of. Each night he reviewed them like construction contracts, his eyes cold and scrutinizing. I got the acceptance letter in early April. A thick white envelope with an embossed seal and familiar blue text. I didn't open it in my bedroom. I took it to the bathroom, locked the door, and tore it open with trembling nails ripping a corner. "Congratulations, Emily Turner." I read that line at least 10 times. Then I sat on the toilet lid, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying from joy, but because for the first time I felt I had the right to dream. The next evening I told Dad at dinner. I'd rehearsed every line about the scholarship, the computer engineering program career prospects. But before I could explain why I wanted to go, he set his spoon down and looked at me like I'd announced I was running off to be a Hollywood actress. "MIT," he repeated. "In Massachusetts, what kind of stunt is this? I don't have time to fund pipe dreams. You'll fail." I froze. No one spoke. Mom sat silently, her eyes sad. Jack glanced at me, lips pursed, but said nothing. Dad stood, grabbed his glass, and said, before leaving the table, "When your dreams crash, remember there's a receptionist spot at my company." Those words echoed through the summer like a steady knock from a past that wouldn't quiet. I carried them while working at a bookstore, studying extra programming, reading about system architecture alone in the library. It wasn't a curse. It was fuel, stronger than any praise I never got. By mid-June, MIT required confirmation of first-year tuition affordability. I'd secured some scholarships but was still short. I had no choice but to do what I dreaded most, knock on Dad's office door. He was at his desk scribbling in a ledger, the desk lamp reflecting off his glasses in a lifeless streak. I stood there for a long time, then took a breath. "I need help with first-year tuition." He didn't look up. "How much?" $8,000. After a few seconds he spoke. "Just the first year. With conditions." I nodded, not asking. "Send me your grades each quarter. Below a B+, it stops. No frivolous spending. And remember when you come back, if there's still a spot, you'll be a receptionist." I nodded again, not arguing. I didn't need him to believe in me. I just needed a crack in the door. The day I left Houston was drizzling. Mom walked me to the door. She didn't cry, only saying, "Eat enough." She handed me a handkerchief embroidered with ET in silver thread. I gripped it like the only thing I could take from the old world to the new. Dad didn't see me off. He stayed in his office where the smell of ink and paper always overpowered emotion. I took a cab to the airport carrying 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with books, and a circuit board I'd secretly built over the summer. On the plane, I sat by the window, watching rain streak the glass. I didn't know how I'd survive in a strange city, among people smarter and more confident than me, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. Not because I hated Dad, but because I'd gone too far from what he called reality. I didn't write to him during my first 3 years at MIT, but I did write one letter folded neatly in my bedside drawer. "You don't need to understand me. I just hope one day you're proud of me, like I once dreamed of being proud of you." I never sent it. I knew he wouldn't read it, and maybe he never wanted to understand. I wasn't sad about that. I was only sad that it never changed. Then, on the very day I walked out of graduation diploma, in handphone buzzing with Jennifer's call about CipherLink's successful IPO, I got another text shorter and colder. "Your dad's in the hospital. Minor stroke. Come back now." It was Jack, my brother. I stared at the phone. My hand froze. My heart slowed. In my mind, I saw an image I hadn't seen in years, a man I once wanted to call Dad, lying motionless in a hospital bed. I stood still for a long time in MIT's main hall, amid the flashes of cameras and cheers, my heart growing colder by the second. I didn't know if I had the courage to go back. But I knew some returns weren't about being welcomed. They were about closing chapters that never fully began. In those nameless, sleepless nights, I lived on adrenaline, on the panic wrapped in logical code and lectures that stretched beyond imagination. I juggled a job at a bookstore in Central Square, slogged through advanced engineering classes, and wrestled with bills deadlines and tangled wires of responsibilities overhead. The only person who made me feel less alone in that chaos was Natalie, my roommate, the first to shove a sandwich into my hands after I pulled an all-nighter for a microchip exam. "You don't need more caffeine," she laughed. "You need sugar and a reason to sleep at least 3 hours." Natalie was from New York, the kind of person who could code debate philosophy and eat instant noodles all at once. She didn't ask about my family. I didn't ask why she avoided calls from unknown numbers. We understood each other, kids raised in homes where voices only echoed one way. Everything shifted in Professor Blackwell's advanced coding class. He was one of the department's strictest, with silver hair and a laser-like gaze. My first exam scored 97. At the top, his note, impressive clarity in logic structure. I reread that line for a week. For the first time, I didn't have to beg for recognition. A week later, I got an email inviting me to his research group on network data security. The lab was on the 3rd floor behind frosted glass, with servers humming non-stop and the faint smell of ozone from running circuits. There I met Amir, a quiet, razor-sharp Iranian student, Zoe, a Californian skateboarder obsessed with blockchain, and Lucas, a Brazilian nerd who carried a folded paper neuron model. We were an odd but oddly cohesive group. CipherLink, the project's name, started with a silly question from Natalie during a late-night pizza session. Why do people keep sending personal info to apps without knowing where it goes? That question kept me awake for 3 nights. It led me to sketch algorithms on our dorm whiteboard, first for encryption, then data fragmentation, then conditional reassembly. Those scribbles slowly became a complete system. We worked at night, days were for classes, jobs, or just surviving. CipherLink took shape, a platform for encrypting personal data, ensuring absolute user ownership, fragmenting data, and reassembling it only with owner authentication. None of us told our families. I didn't tell Dad, not because I hid it, but because I knew he wouldn't understand. Or worse, he'd call it a pointless game. Our first system test happened on a rainy October night. I hit enter with trembling hands, eyes glued to the screen like it was a mirror reflecting my future. It worked. No errors. Everything ran as designed. I didn't jump or cry. I just sat there, hands on the keyboard, heart pounding, feeling something strange, not quite happiness, but the sense of crossing a threshold I'd never been allowed to approach. Professor Blackwell invited us to present at an internal conference. I stood on the stage facing a room of elite students from around the world, gripping the presentation remote, my heart taut as a bowstring. But I spoke, clearly, step by step. No technical errors, no flaws in explanation. When I finished, there was applause, not loud, but enough to make me pause for a few seconds. "I see potential," the professor said. "But you need to address reverse access. Solve that, and this could have real impact." That night, I emailed the team we need a domain name. At 2:57 a.m., CipherLink.io was registered. Lucas set up a GitHub repo. Natalie designed a sleek logo. Amir submitted a grant application to a startup fund. I sat staring at the project name on my browser. It was real. No longer a student dream, but something that could exist in the world. I didn't know what Dad was doing then. Maybe sleeping or reviewing a construction contract in his office. But for the first time in years, I thought of him without anger or disdain. Only a gentle emptiness. I wished he could see me now. Not to be proud, but to understand I hadn't failed. The next morning, as I worked on a new security module, my phone buzzed. A text from Jack, my second brother. "Dad's in the hospital. Minor stroke. You should fly back." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was shocked I'd considered it might happen, but because my heart didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to turn off the phone and return to my unfinished code, but another part, weaker, softer, reminded me I was still his daughter. Dad never acknowledged me, but I still had time to not be like him. I stood up, my head spinning. Before me, I saw hospital corridors, IV drips, ventilators, and the face of a man I'd spent my life trying to surpass, yet never truly left behind. I needed to go back. Not for forgiveness, but to avoid regret. An ivory envelope sat before me in a packed MIT auditorium. My fingers trembled not from cold, but from something bursting inside me. The bold text on the simple paper read, "Winner of the MIT Startup Challenge, $50,000 seed grant." It was a moment I knew, even if I lived to 80, I'd never forget. CipherLink had won. From a vague idea scribbled on a dorm whiteboard, the project became the biggest turning point of my life. I looked at Amir, Lucas, and Zoe, all three stunned, then bursting into laughter. Natalie at the back of the hall screamed like she was at a football game, raising her hands in victory. Amid the stage lights, I didn't see Dad anywhere, but in my mind, his voice lingered cold and ever-present. Those tech games won't get you anywhere. We accepted the award, shook hands, posed for photos, and answered student press questions. I did it all mechanically. Only when I stepped outside the November wind hitting my face did it feel real and overwhelming. I called Mom. She answered after 2 rings, her voice anxious yet excited. "Are you okay? Why are you calling so late?" "Mom," I said, steadying my voice, "we won the award. $50,000. The top prize in the MIT Startup Challenge." Silence on the other end. Then a stifled sob, not loud but trembling, as if she'd released a fear she'd carried for years. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you," but her exhale was enough. "Have you told Dad?" she asked softly. I hesitated. "I'll call him." I did, and he answered. I explained briefly, clearly, like reporting at a meeting. His voice didn't waver, still calm, firm, with a hint of mockery. "Playing with tech will only lead to dreams. Keep chasing fantasies and you'll end up a receptionist." Those words slammed a door shut inside me. No congratulations, no acknowledgement. He called my dream a game. "I don't need your money anymore," I said, firm for the first time. "From now on, I'll handle everything." He didn't respond. Just silence, then a long beep. He'd hung up. I didn't cry. Not this time. My chest felt empty, like a room cleared out. I stood in the campus courtyard watching snowflakes fall. And I knew I was done waiting for his approval. I'd walk my own path. The days that followed were a whirlwind. We opened a project account, divided tasks, and mapped out development. Lucas handled the interface, Amir focused on data authentication. Zoe built the network architecture, and I worked on the encryption core, the foundation of CipherLink. Each line of code I wrote carried meaning, not just a product, but proof. We caught attention from other MIT research groups. A professor from the AI Institute offered mentorship. A successful founder suggested an accelerator program. For the first time, I didn't have to beg for belief. Zoe proposed seeking external funding. "MIT has VentureSpark," she said. "A small angel fund for pre-seed startups. They backed 2 teams last year, now valued in the millions." We crafted a pitch deck. I spent a week rewriting the mission statement. Natalie helped refine every word. "You need to tell them why you're doing this, not just because it works." I wrote about privacy, about users' data being stolen, about unchecked surveillance tech. I wrote about my gentle mother who didn't understand the internet, but got ads matching our phone conversations. We built CipherLink to give users what's rightfully theirs, their data and their choices. The final slide read, "If you don't own your data, you don't own yourself." We submitted to VentureSpark on a snowy November night. The wind howled, but in the classroom we sat quietly staring at the screen, waiting for something bigger than money. A week later, the response came, "We're impressed. Meet us next week for an interview." I didn't scream or jump. I just stared at the words, then looked up to see my team watching me, not with doubt, but with trust. That night I called Mom. "If CipherLink gets funded, will you come to Boston for the announcement?" She hesitated. "Will you invite Dad?" I thought for a moment. I won't invite him, but I won't stop him if he wants to come. On the other end, Mom sighed. Softly, not sadly. "You've changed," she said. "No, Mom," I replied. "I'm just becoming myself." I hung up and stepped onto the dorm balcony. The wind stung my face, but I stood there watching the city's golden lights. In my head, Dad's cold voice was gone, replaced by a quieter, deeper one mine, telling me not to stop. I'd crossed a threshold, not of success, but of freedom. But freedom always comes with a price. And that price came sooner than I thought. Success for many is a destination. For me, it was just a new door opening to a longer, rougher road, filled with late dinners, 2 a.m. emails, and disappointments that choked me. CipherLink's first office was a renovated apartment in Somerville, 20 minutes from MIT by train. The ground floor had a pizza joint open late. We ate there. So often they named a special cipher combo. We crammed 4 desks into a space barely fit for 6 people standing. Next to us was a creaky printer and a leaking air conditioner. I woke at 6 a.m., took the train from the dorm, and worked until 11 p.m. That routine lasted nearly a year. I learned everything from scratch drafting service contracts, financial planning, payroll taxes, intellectual property filings, things school never taught. And I did it all without asking Dad a single question. Our first client was a small New Hampshire clinic, needing to secure patient records for a cloud transition. I remember the middle-aged doctor squinting at me over Zoom. "How old are you?" 22. And the CEO? Yes, I'm the co-founder and lead engineer. He hesitated. "I thought I'd be speaking to someone older." I smiled calmly. "I understand, but your data won't wait. If you don't protect it now in 2 years, you'll want to talk to me." We signed the contract the next week, not because he trusted me, but because our system worked. Still, I felt challenged not just for my age, but my gender. In investor calls, I was often the only one not in a suit, the only one without a beard, the only one asked, "Who's the lead engineer?" I didn't react. I just opened my laptop, showed the code, and said, "This is what I wrote." Simple. Convincing. Lucas suggested letting him or Amir pitch to VCs, noting women often face harsher scrutiny. I understood, but refused. "I'm not a figurehead," I said. "I wrote CipherLink's core. If they don't trust me, I don't need their money." I kept learning. Nights were spent studying tech law, SaaS negotiations, company valuations. I took weekend classes, memorized pitch phrases, and prepared for tough questions. I didn't want anyone to see me prepare, but I was always more prepared than anyone. A small Boston fund noticed CipherLink. They called us for due diligence on a cold, rainy morning. I arrived 30 minutes early, reviewing slides and steadying my pulse. The interviewer was a woman, hair in a high-bun gray suit, sharp eyes. She read our product description and looked at me. "How far do you want to take this?" "Until users don't have to worry about their data," I said. "Until privacy isn't a privilege, but a default." She nodded. No smile, but her eyes softened. Weeks later, they invested $300,000 for 8% equity, a sum that pushed CipherLink into a new phase. I emailed the team with a funding plan, but paused before sending. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I texted Dad. "CipherLink closed its first funding round. $300K. I negotiated it. Thanks for teaching me to rely on no one." No reply came. Weeks later, during a client meeting, Natalie burst in, unusual for her. She said, handing me her phone. "Your brother. Urgent." I pressed it to my ear. Jack's breathing was heavy. "Dad's in the hospital. Minor stroke. Doctors say he needs monitoring." I stood frozen. Everything in my mind slowed. "You should come back," Jack said. "He's still Dad." That night, I sat alone in the office, staring at an unfinished investor pitch. But my mind was 2,000 miles away in Houston. I booked a morning flight, taking only a change of clothes and a copy of CipherLink's operations report. I arrived at the hospital near noon. Mom hugged me tightly in the hallway, her hands trembling. Jack nodded, his eyes full of unspoken words. I entered the room where the man who'd been my pillar, my fear, my rejecter, lay still, his arm laced with IVs. Dad looked at me. His eyes squinted, surprised. His voice rasped. "My daughter." I stood still. I'd dreamed of that moment so many times, when he'd call me daughter without command or doubt, but as acknowledgement. No apology, no tears. Just a quiet sentence, enough to let me release years of hurt rejection and his silent favoritism toward my brothers. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw his lips move again, saying nothing more, just closing his eyes, as if that one truth our bond had taken all his strength to admit. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, the rough hand that once coldly tapped the table when I spoke of engineering, now trembling under hospital blankets. I didn't wait for an apology. He didn't offer one. But calling me daughter, for him, that was the farthest he could go. I didn't hold it against him, because I'd gone far enough to not need his validation. But sometimes a single look, a whispered name, is enough to forgive what's old. Some mornings start with warm, coffee routine emails and work texts, then end in chilling panic. That morning was one of them. 6:18 a.m. My phone's email alert woke me from half sleep. The subject line in all caps, no greeting, no courtesy. "Urgent, breach detected." A chill ran down my spine. The sender was a major California insurance company, a client we'd signed 2 months prior for data encryption, our biggest contract yet, both financially and for credibility. I leapt out of bed, hands shaking, as I opened the email. They claimed our system failed to protect patient data, with unauthorized access to over 10,000 internal records. It didn't take long to gather the team in the office. Everyone knew this wasn't a minor glitch. We dug into system logs, reviewed every update, every line of code. After 4 hours, the answer was clear. The client had installed a third-party tool to optimize performance, which inadvertently disabled CipherLink's default outer encryption layer. Not our fault. But in the startup world, being right isn't enough. That afternoon, we received a legal warning. They didn't admit their error. Instead, they claimed CipherLink's instructions were unclear, and threatened to sue for inadequate security unless we took public responsibility. It felt like a concrete block on my chest, not because I feared court, but because I knew one lawsuit could topple everything we'd built over 2 years. We didn't have the budget for tech lawyers, no liability insurance, and a tarnished reputation would deter investors. Dissolving is an option, I told the team, forcing calm. Natalie, usually the loudest, sat silent. Lucas tugged his hair until his scalp reddened. Amir muttered unbelievable. That night, I didn't go back to the dorm. I sat alone in the office, watching the city lights dim. In my hand was a cash flow projection we had 3 months left. No cushion for shocks like this. I sent a long, honest email to every potential investor I'd contacted over the past 6 months. Of 13 emails, only one replied, Elaine Gardner. I'd heard of her. Founder of Elevate Capital, a fund for women-led companies. A former cybersecurity engineer turned financier. She was low profile, but influential among Boston's women investors. Her email was 2 lines. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Cafe on Albany Street. Bring legal docs. I arrived 20 minutes early, heart pounding with each step. Elaine walked in on time, bright eyes, silver hair, navy suit, calm demeanor. I read everything she said sitting down. Your email and CipherLink's technical model. I listened silently. This breach wasn't your fault, but your response matters. We're trying to negotiate, I said. Then let me help you gain leverage. I held my breath. $500,000 for 12% equity, she said slowly. Immediate. But I have one condition. I looked at her. Yes. If you succeed, promise to open doors for the women behind you. You can't be the only one to climb and then pull up the ladder. My heart paused. For a moment I thought of Mom, the woman who lived in the shadow of a man who never believed in his daughter. I thought of 16-year-old Emily hiding her MIT application in a drawer. I nodded, I promise. Weeks later, Elaine finalized the investment. With that money, we hired a skilled lawyer who drafted a settlement. CipherLink didn't admit fault, but offered 3 months of free security recovery. No lawsuit happened, but the lesson was unforgettable. Elaine didn't appear often, but she watched. Occasional texts came, don't sign without checking confidentiality clauses. Or Section 5.3, there's a trap. I knew she wasn't just investing in the company, she was investing in me. And I began to understand that success wasn't about numbers, but about quiet promises kept. I wasn't just running a startup. I was building a path for girls who were never trusted to lead. We rented a small office overlooking the Charles River. Morning sunlight, afternoon breezes of paradise compared to MIT's library corner. From 4 founders, CipherLink grew to nearly 40 employees. Each step was a rung I built and climbed with equal parts fear and hope. Our biggest win wasn't new code or products, but hiring Jennifer Voss as CFO. A former Fortune 100 CFO, she wasn't swayed by flashy pitches. Yet she joined saying simply, I'm not here for charity. I'm here because I believe you'll make it, and I don't want to miss out. With Jennifer, CipherLink transformed from a passionate tech team into a real organization. She forced me to grasp what I'd avoided: burn rate dilution cap tables numbers that decided the company's survival. I worked like time was a reverse hourglass. From tech demos to client negotiations, hiring strategies to press interviews, I learned, acted, and proved myself. Then, unexpectedly, the media noticed CipherLink. Forbes wrote young engineers redefining data security. TechCrunch called me the standout young female CEO in cybersecurity. I'd dreamed of this day. But in that moment, I felt a quiet emptiness. I called Dad. I didn't know what I expected. Congratulations. A nod of approval. Or just for him to know I was alive and thriving. He answered after 3 rings, his voice low, curt, familiar. Why are you calling? I took a breath. I wanted to share news. CipherLink signed a deal with a Fortune 500 company. We'll secure their global payment system. Silence. Then are you profitable yet? That question cut through my fragile joy. I froze. Not yet, but with this deal, I believe. He interrupted. Money is money. Don't talk about the future with someone who's seen too many projects die. I gripped the phone tightly. The words weren't new, but they still chilled me. I understand, I said softly, then hung up. Anger didn't come right away. Instead, a long, heavy silence, like the darkness after stage lights fade. I'd thought enough success would change him. I was wrong. And the worst part was I still hoped. That night I sat alone in the office. Jennifer passed by, pausing to look at me. You okay? She asked. Still surviving, I forced a smile. She sat down, arms crossed. My father once said, if you don't marry by 30, No decent company will hire you. It took me a decade to realize not everyone will see your worth, and they don't have to. Her words didn't lift me immediately, but they planted a seed, a lightness from knowing I didn't need permission to live as myself. We kept growing. CipherLink hired more staff, opened a San Francisco satellite office. Investor meetings became routine. Then one day, Jennifer walked in with a thick folder. We've been approached by 3 major funds, and a bank suggested an IPO timeline within 12 months. I froze. From a late-night Cambridge idea from a laptop and $50,000 prize CipherLink had reached a dream I hadn't dared voice. I'm not sure I'm ready, I admitted. Jennifer shrugged. No one is, but you'll learn. That night, I walked along the river. The city stayed awake, but a part of me long asleep wanted Dad's acknowledgement. Maybe it was time to stop waiting, because I wasn't building just for myself anymore. I was building for those never trusted to lead, to take charge, to change the game. And I couldn't stop. Sometimes life's biggest milestones don't come alone. They crash together like twin waves hitting your heart at once. When that happens, you learn to balance even if you're trembling. That week, I lived split in 2 halves as CipherLink's CEO racing with the CFO and lawyers to negotiate with investment banks for an IPO dubbed the most promising in cybersecurity startups this year. Half as a graduating student who'd once secretly applied to MIT behind her father's back. I don't remember how many hours I slept in the 5 days before graduation. Everything moved at breakneck speed: S1 filings, PR messaging, financial data checks, endless SEC revisions. Sometimes I wondered how could a 22-year-old who years ago was typing chemistry reports in a library stand in IPO negotiations with Wall Street suits. But I had no time to doubt. I just kept moving. On graduation morning, I wore my cap and gown, standing among hundreds of MIT students who'd survived Cambridge's brutal winters, grueling classes, and endless hackathons. But my mind was half in CipherLink's office where Jennifer awaited the bank's final call. I hadn't planned to invite Dad. I'd learned to walk without his applause. But at the last moment, for reasons I didn't understand, I sent an invitation through Mom. As I stood in line waiting for my name, I saw him far off in the parent section. His face was stern, arms crossed as if he were here to inspect, not celebrate. His eyes hadn't changed, the ones that boxed me in during childhood, making me feel small no matter what I achieved. I expected nothing. I just wanted to prove I got here on my own. When my name was called Emily Grace Turner, Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, I walked to the stage. Applause erupted, professors smiled, friends waved. But I looked only one way. Dad didn't clap. He sat still, giving a slight nod, polite but cold. I wasn't disappointed, just empty. As I returned to my seat, I got his text. One line, handle it yourself. I read it 3 times. No exclamation, no congratulations, no trace of warmth. As if this ceremony was just another test. I pocketed the phone. Before tears could come, it buzzed again, Jennifer calling. I stepped out of the row, crossing the campus lawn, amid fluttering gowns. Jennifer, I said, pressing the phone to my ear. A soft breath on the ot 'other end, then her voice brimming with emotion. They confirmed. IPO price $41 per share. Company valued at $1.13 billion. I stood still. Around me, students cheered, snapped photos, tossed caps skyward. Emily Turner, the girl told she'd fail who could be a receptionist, when Dreams Crash was leading a billion-dollar company. I looked at the sky. No tears fell. Just cool, clear wind like the universe's confirmation. I didn't text Dad back. I didn't search for his eyes in the crowd. Not out of anger. I just didn't need to anymore. When I returned to CipherLink's office that afternoon, the team was gathered. Jennifer popped champagne. Everyone clapped. I just stood there smiling faintly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt at peace. Because I'd crossed a milestone I once thought needed someone else's validation. It didn't. That night, as city lights glowed through the office window, I wrote in my journal the day I graduated. The day CipherLink went public. The day I realized I've finally grown. And that same night, as I gathered IPO documents for the board, Mom called. She rarely called so late. I answered. Emily. Her voice broke. Your father. He's in the hospital. Minor stroke. I stood frozen. Not from pain, but because I didn't know what to feel. She said he was awake but weak. She wasn't sure if he wanted to see me. I looked at the office lights, then my hands, the hands that trembled, leaving that red brick house in Texas, now signing billion-dollar IPO papers. I took a breath. Mom, I'll fly back tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I sat alone. Not to think, to listen. My heart beat steadily. But something had shifted, as if the journey ahead wasn't about success anymore, but about forgiveness. I didn't know what made my hands shake more, the news of Dad's stroke, or holding CipherLink's financial report, its logo crisp, the student game he once dismissed. 2 weeks after the IPO, I left the office not for a tech conference, but to fly back to Houston, to that old house, to face a man who'd been my sky, then my silent void. Memorial Hermann Hospital was steeped in the quiet sadness of places where fate slips from control. Mom met me in the third-floor hallway, her eyes gentle as ever, but now tinged with fear. "He's awake," she said, "but the doctors say not to talk much." She glanced at the document bag I carried, then looked away. "Are you sure you want to show him that?" I nodded, not because I thought he'd smile, but because I needed to do what was right, nothing more. ICU room 307, opened to the sterile smell of antiseptic. White light fell on the man lying still, one side of his face slightly drooped, a telltale stroke sign. But it wasn't the machines or tubes that gripped my heart, it was his eyes. No longer steely, like when he judged me as a child. Now they were the eyes of an old, tired man who knew he couldn't stay rigid forever. I stepped closer, hesitating to sit. I placed my bag on the small table by his bed and pulled out a thick report. "I brought this for you to see," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't look at me, but his eyes moved slowly, resting on CipherLink's logo on the cover. His cracked lips twitched as if to speak, then stopped. I opened the report, pointing to a chart. We exceeded Q2 targets by nearly 27%. 4 Fortune 500 companies signed contracts. Operating costs dropped 12% after infrastructure optimization. I spoke like I was presenting to a board, but inside my heart broke into pieces. Dad closed his eyes. No response. I stepped back, then heard him call, his voice weak, halting, like a fragile thread between two people grown too far apart. "My daughter." I froze. I'd dreamed of that moment so many times when he'd call me daughter, not with command or doubt, but as acknowledgement. No apology, no tears. Just a quiet sentence enough to release years of hurt rejection and his silent favoritism toward my brothers. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw his lips move again, saying nothing more, just closing his eyes, as if that one truth our bond had taken all his strength to admit. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, the rough hand that once coldly tapped the table when I spoke of engineering, now trembling under hospital blankets. I didn't wait for an apology. He didn't offer one. But calling me daughter, for him, that was the farthest he could go. I didn't hold it against him, because I'd gone far enough to not need his validation. But sometimes a single look, a whispered name, is enough to forgive what's old. I left the report by his bed. "I don't need your congratulations," I said, my voice softening, as if speaking to my 12-year-old self. "I just want you to know I did it, not to prove anything, but to be at peace." Mom came in later with a warm glass of water. I stood, brushing her shoulder. She looked at me, eyes misty, as if finally understanding how far her daughter had come to stand in this room, not as a victor, but as a daughter returning. I left the hospital as Houston drizzled. In the car to the hotel, I opened my phone, looking at my graduation photo, one hand holding my diploma, the other my phone with the IPO news. But today I truly felt grown, because I knew forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was choosing to love even when someone hadn't earned it. It was looking into the eyes of the person who hurt you and still calling them Dad. That night I opened my laptop, sent Jennifer an updated post-IPO strategy, but before hitting send, I added, "Taking 2 days off. I'm home." The next morning I returned to the hospital. Dad was still tired but more alert. I said nothing more. We just sat together in silence. He picked up the report, flipping through it slowly. For the first time, I didn't need to say much. Late that afternoon, Mom called me to the hallway. "There's something," she said. "Your father's law firm called. Before the hospital, he signed over part of his company's shares to you. No one in the family knew. He did it quietly." I stood still, clutching my bag. Some love isn't spoken, it's shown in silent acts. And some people take a lifetime to learn to express it. But when they do, it can heal a heart once thought frozen forever. After 3 days in Houston, I returned to Boston with a light suitcase, but a heavy heart. The CipherLink team thought I'd taken a short post-IPO vacation. No one knew I'd spent a night in a cold ICU room beside the father I'd both loved and resented for over 20 years. My first morning back, I opened my laptop to an email invitation titled Collaboration Proposal, Texas Construction Materials Company, sent from Dad's personal address. I reread it several times. For the first time, he didn't send it through Mom or say, "Tell Emily to call back." For the first time, he reached out directly as a partner, not as father and daughter, not with orders, but with a formal invitation. The message was brief. He wanted me on his company's board as a strategic tech advisor and proposed a partnership in smart material supply chains, an area CipherLink's data platform was exploring. I didn't feel angry or joyful, just strange. I remembered Elaine's words from our seed funding days. When women succeed, the world smiles, but it'll try to turn that smile into a trap. I hovered over the delete button, but then I sat up and wrote back, "Thank you for thinking of me. I won't join the board, but I'm open to meeting to discuss a partnership between our companies. On equal terms." I hit send my heart still. 3 days later, he called for a video meeting. For the first time, I saw him not in a stiff collared shirt, but a gray tee sitting at his old desk. His face still bore traces of post-stroke fatigue, but his eyes had changed, no longer rigid, no longer judging. We talked business like two CEOs. I set clear terms, no personal interference in operations contracts through CipherLink's legal team, all data transfers fully encrypted. He nodded silent for most of the call, but as I prepared to end it, he said, "I know, I'm not good at talking." I didn't respond. I understood he didn't need to continue. For the first time, I saw him not trying to win an argument or maintain dominance, just accepting. The first collaboration began 6 weeks later, a trial order. His staff used CipherLink's software to manage material quality. Results were positive. He texted me, "It actually works." I replied, "I know." I didn't return to Houston more often, or join family dinners like before. But Dad and I started communicating differently. He called me Emily, no longer that girl. I called him my father with respectful distance. I chose a neutral ground between us, not cold, not too close. A space where I could be both CEO and daughter. A space where I didn't need to sacrifice myself for his approval. I didn't forgive in a Hollywood way, no tearful hugs under golden lights with swelling music. I forgave as someone who'd grown with scars, accepting that love can come late, but when it does, even clumsily, it still matters. Each weekend I sent Dad short company updates like those for investors. Nothing special, no flair. But I knew he read every word. Sometimes he'd reply, "Good job optimizing hosting costs," or "Series B valuation solid." Mom told me once he doesn't know how to say you're great, but he rereads your reports a dozen times. I wasn't surprised. I'd been the child holding up awards to his frowns. But now, when I no longer needed praise, I got his acknowledgement, even if just through an email. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't erasing the past. It's stepping over it without letting it pull you back. And that for me was enough. We didn't become a perfect family. But among adults who know boundaries and each other's place, there's a unique kind of peace. The next month, I was invited to speak at the Women in Tech conference in San Francisco. Elaine sat in the front row smiling as I spoke of the promise I made when accepting her first investment to help other women enter tech without needing permission. After the talk, I checked my phone. A new text from Dad. "Good speech." No emojis, no exclamation, no Hollywood ending, but I smiled reading it. For the first time, he listened without arguing. And that was enough. That night, I walked MIT's campus alone. I stopped by Barker Library where I'd once fallen asleep on cold wooden tables. I stood on the Mass Ave Bridge watching lights reflect on the Charles River, no longer the girl running from a red brick house in Houston. I'd grown. Now I lived not for anyone's approval, but to be the person I needed as a child. The one who could say you're not wrong for dreaming. The one who could whisper peace comes not from how others love you, but from how you love yourself. I never heard Dad say sorry, but it no longer mattered. I had my team. I had CipherLink. I had girls like Ava starting their own journeys. And above all, I had freedom. This journey didn't end with a hug. It ended with a smile light enough for no one to see, but deep enough for me to know I'd truly moved on.